right, I want you to imagine something. A flight takes off, and then it just disappears. No debris, no black box, nothing. It just vanishes. For 9 years, it's nothing more than a ghost story. And then the impossible happens. This is that story.
134. That's the number of people, passengers and crew, aboard that Douglas DC-3 aircraft, flight NC-16002. Every single one of them was just expecting a normal everyday flight into Miami.
But on the night of December 27th, 1948, something went terribly, terribly wrong. After one last, kind of strange message from the pilot, the plane just blinked off the radar. And its last known position? Well, of course, it was right in the heart of the Bermuda Triangle. So the world mourned, families grieved, and the flight just became another spooky legend. But this is where our story really, truly begins. Because 9 years later, 82 of them returned. Alive. The question is, how on earth is that possible? So, to understand how they came back, we first have to go back to how they got lost. And this wasn't just some simple engine failure. No, this was a flight into the complete unknown. It is absolutely astonishing how fast everything went south. At 8:13 p.m., Captain Miller radios in about a small technical issue. No big deal, right? Well, just 1 minute later, the plane is gone, swallowed by a storm that came out of nowhere. For a full 30 minutes, they're just getting thrown around in the sky until they punch through to the other side, over an island that's not on any map. With dead engines, they glide down and smash into a gigantic tree, which, unbelievably, breaks their fall and saves every single person on board. Okay, so surviving that crash was a miracle, no doubt. But it was also just the beginning of a whole new nightmare. Now they had to survive the island. I mean, just think about the situation they were in. 10 people were badly hurt from the crash. They couldn't find any fresh water anywhere. The food they pulled from the wreckage was only going to last a few days. And everything growing on this island was a total mystery. Could be food, could be poison. And the worst part, the radio, their only hope, was completely dead. And it didn't take long for the island to show its teeth. One man, starving and desperate, ate some strange-looking fruit. A few hours later, he was dead, the island's first victim. It was a horrifying lesson, and it's what kicked off the first real fights over what little food they had left. But right in the middle of all that darkness and fear, you get this spark, literally, of pure genius. A teenager realizes he can use the lenses from his glasses to focus the sunlight, and after hours of trying, he makes fire. This wasn't just a small win. This was a lifeline. This was warmth. It was a way to cook. It was a way to keep predators away at night. You know, that little flame did more than just warm them up. It sparked the beginning of a new society. The survivors started to move past the shock and started thinking long-term, building a real community. But not everyone was ready to settle in. Some were still banking on a quick rescue. After about 10 days, 5 young people just couldn't wait anymore. They pieced together a raft from the plane's debris and just set off into the ocean. They were never, ever seen again. And just like that, their little society got smaller. 129. That loss was a huge blow. It was the moment everyone was forced to accept the brutal truth. They were completely on their own. So at this point, the choice was pretty simple. Adapt or die. Captain Miller really stepped up and got them organized into teams. One group's job was to salvage anything useful from the plane. Another built shelters. A third was in charge of foraging. And Dr. Evelyn Reed, who happened to be a retired Army doctor, took over all medical care. They weren't just crash victims anymore. They were becoming pioneers. And so, the long wait began. I mean, can you even imagine? Days turned into months, and months bled into years. 9 whole years of complete and total silence, completely cut off from the rest of the world. And those 9 years were just an insane roller coaster of hope and absolute heartbreak. A year and a half in, a baby is born on the island, a real symbol of hope. But then, at year 2, they spend months building a massive boat, send 25 of their strongest people out for help, and a storm sinks it, killing 16 of them. By year 5, resources are so scarce that their society splits into 2 warring factions. And then year 8, a cyclone flattens their entire camp, and a few weeks later, a violent earthquake hits. It just never let up. When you just look at the cold, hard numbers, the human toll is just staggering. Of the 134 people who crashed, only 82 would ever see home again. 31 died on the island, from sickness, accidents, or just giving up. 16 were lost at sea in that boat disaster. And those first 5 who left, they're just gone. And after so much failure and loss, their society really started to crack. A huge divide opened up. You had Captain Miller's group who were adamant. We never give up. We keep trying to escape. But then there was another group that basically said, stop. This is our home now. Trying to leave is just suicide. At this point, it really seemed like the end of the line. The survivors were exhausted, they were divided, and their numbers were shrinking. It looked like all hope was finally gone. But then, a chain of almost impossible coincidences gave them one last chance. You honestly could not make this up. First, that big earthquake actually shifts the plane wreckage, and it exposes some wires that have been buried for years. Later, the engineer, Arthur Weiss, is just poking around the damaged radio. At that exact moment, a massive, rare solar flare hits the Earth's atmosphere. Weiss is just fiddling with a switch, probably out of habit, and for the first time in 9 years, a little power light flickers on. With his hands shaking, he grabs the microphone, and this weak, cracking voice somehow travels across the ocean to an air traffic controller in Miami who probably thought it was a hoax. And this is what he heard. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is flight NC-16002. We are alive. We have been stranded on an island for 9 years. That one radio call changed everything. A 9-year-old ghost story suddenly became the rescue mission of the century. It was all for the 82 people who were finally coming home. So the U.S. Navy scrambles. They follow the faint signal. They spot a massive bonfire the survivors had lit, and a ship appears on the horizon. The moment they were found, just imagine the raw emotion. 82 survivors were brought back to a world that had long since declared them dead. They were reunited with families who had mourned them and moved on. Their story became an instant legend. And a year later, the book Lost in the Echo came out and cemented their incredible story in history forever. Their nightmare was over, but a story like this leaves you with a really big question, right? What does this actually teach us about the absolute limits of what a person can endure and about the incredible, sometimes illogical power of hope? In the end, I think it's a story that proves one thing, that even when you are in the deepest, most absolute darkness, the smallest, most improbable ray of hope can still be enough to pierce right through it.